All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Armchair Travel to Greece with the Traveling Librarian. So I'm going to introduce Jeff here. So Jeff is the retired head of reference services at the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield, Massachusetts. And he's an avid traveler and photographer. And I believe, I was just checking this recently, I believe this is Jeff's 15th presentation to the Tewksbury Public Library.
Wow.
And previous to that, we partnered with the Chelmsford Library for several presentations as well. So folks, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Jeff for joining us this afternoon. And Jeff, you can take it away. And just as a reminder, Jeff, you haven't started sharing your screen yet.
Yep, I am about to do that now. If I can find, there we go. Thank you everyone for joining me today. If you're new, welcome. If you've come to presentations before, thanks for coming back. I apologize for many of us, I think, are in the middle of a horrible heat wave. It's close to 100 degrees here in eastern Massachusetts. And I apologize for taking you somewhere hot. We should probably be going to Iceland or Norway or someplace like that, but we're going to Greece. So, and I also find it kind of interesting that so many of you are interested in going to yet more and more Greek islands, but that makes me happy because I love going to Greek islands. And so I'm happy to show you a couple that are a little off the beaten path, at least for non-Greeks. But I will get started right away. And as Robert said, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into either the chat or the Q&A, and I'll keep an eye as we go through. And at the end of the program, I'll answer them as well. So let's get started right away. Just to put Greece on the map and put the two places we're talking about, I thought these would be two islands that would be good to put together because they're very different and they're about as far apart from each other as you can get in Greece. We're going to be going to Thasos, which is the northernmost Greek island, way, way up here. And we're also going to go to Karpathos, which is way down here, almost as far south as you can get. And just to remind you of how the island groups in Greece work, there's a bunch of different ones that you may have heard of. The Karpathos is part of this yellow group down south called the Dodecanese, which Dodeca is the Greek word for 12 because it's named for the 12 major islands in that group. And the purple ones up here that Thasos is part of are just the northern Greek islands. The ones that you probably see most if you watch travelogues of Greece or you've ever seen a calendar with beautiful Greek pictures, most of the islands that you're familiar with are going to be the orange ones here called the Kyklades. That includes Santorini, Mykonos. Those are the islands that have beautiful whitewashed buildings with blue church domes and all kinds of things like that. But we're visiting two different kinds of places. I'm going to start with Thasos. Which, as I said, is the northernmost island. It's not very large, and to give you an idea of how big it is, this is, for those of you in the Boston area, this will mean more to you, but it's roughly the size of, like, if you plunked it in the middle of Boston Harbor, it would pretty much fill the bay. So it's not that big. It's about 12, 15 miles in diameter, very mountainous. There's only about 13,000 people. On the right, the red line that you can see is where I went. I explored it with a rental car, mostly around the edge where all of the interesting stuff is, but also up into the mountains. It is very close to the mainland. It's only about 5 miles away. The ferry ride takes barely 30 minutes, and you can see here, we're looking from the hills on the mainland, and you can see Thasos just off in the distance. If you take the ferry, you can see how close it is. It's like I said, barely 20 minutes on the ferry. Thasos does not have an airport, so if you do want to go, ferry is the only option. And when you arrive, you get to the main town, which faces the mainland. It's a pleasant, very small tourist port, nestled at the base of the hills, facing the mainland. And you can see how green Thasos is compared to the islands that I was talking about before, like Santorini or Mykonos, which are very bare. They're known for being very barren, brown during the summer. They have olive groves and so forth. Thasos is very lush. Up in the northern part of Greece, it's surprisingly, it can be very cool in the mountains, and it's much more forested compared to the southern Aegean islands. The port, I stayed in the port, which was a nice place to stay because there was a lot of restaurants and shops and so forth. This big old mansion that you can see here is now used as the Port Authority. There are a number of very beautiful old buildings in the town. And the old port, the old harbor, is still a working fishing port, so you'll see plenty of boats. And you can clearly see the mainland off in the distance. It makes a very easy weekend trip for people who live in that part of Greece where you can escape to an island with just at the spur of the moment. I was there last August, which is not really the best time to go because it was really hot and it's probably the most touristy time of year. So it was actually pretty crowded for a place like Thasos. Most of the tourists who were there were from the Eastern European Balkan countries. There were a lot of Romanians, a lot of Turks, there were a lot of Bulgarians because it's very convenient for them to drive down from their own countries, and it's very easily accessible. Again, with just a short ferry ride, they can spend a week or so there hanging out on the beach. It also happens to be the time for watermelons, which are very popular in Greece during the summer, and much nicer. They have much more flavor than the ones that you get here in the U.S. This is a view looking back up towards the mountains behind the town. And probably one of the most interesting things to do if you're in the port is to visit the little museum, an excellent small archaeological museum. It's not very big. You can see the whole thing in less than an hour. The highlight in the museum is this statue from 600 BC. It's called a kouros, which is the term for an ancient Greek statue of a youth, usually very, very vertical, very, very severe. And this one in particular, it actually is not from Thasos, which is kind of funny. You'd think it was from the island, but it was actually found in central Greece in the early 20th century. There's an old photo of them digging it out of the ground. But it's quite a find. It's about 11 feet tall and is probably the best known thing in this little museum. But there's a number of other superb exhibits there as well from different time periods, including an awful lot of stuff about the history of Thasos, which did have ancient settlements on it. So there's a lot of archaeology from the island itself, from different time periods back in the early centuries BC, right up through the Hellenistic period. Some beautiful sculptures. And also, very close to the museum at that end of town is the old colony, the ruins of the original capital, the city of Thasos. It was originally colonized, the island, by the Phoenicians way, way long ago. But in the 6th to the 7th century BC, they founded a Greek colony there. And the ancient city is still there, right next to the modern port. And you can see the public square. There's a number of foundations where you can see the ancient agora. It was also an important island in that time period for both marble and gold mining, which made the island a very important place in Greece economically. So you can explore all of these ruins very easily on foot from the town. It's a very small place. There's a wonderful ancient theater. It was in the process of restoration while I was there. And if you climb up to the hill where the original Acropolis was, the main fortification that looked out over the harbor for protection, there's a number of other ruins, fortified walls and so forth where the old castle was, and you get a wonderful view over the island and also over the port, which you can see off in the distance there, and up the coast to the east where the beautiful view of the Aegean Sea is. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour around the island, more or less clockwise. And one of the places I went is probably the most famous beach on the entire island, which is called Saliara Beach. And as you can see, unfortunately, I was there in August, and it was so overrun by tourists that this is what it looks like. Totally unpleasant. There's no way you would get me to spend the day on the beach with this many people. So I only hung around for a few minutes to see what it looked like. I would love to go back to Thasos sometime off season, like in the early spring or fall, when there's far fewer people there. But the beach itself is actually beautiful. It's worth going to look just to see how gorgeous the sand is. The reason it's famous is that the sand is actually marble, tiny pieces of the local white marble that have, over the millennia, have ground down into small pebbles or fine sand. And right next to the incredible blue water, it's quite a spectacular sight. Unfortunately, during the summer, this is not the time that you want to be there. So I quickly left. But speaking of the marble is still quarried on the island. It's been known since antiquity, but it's still happening. So marble quarries are still found in several places in the island. This is one of them, where you can see the different grades of marble. Some are large slabs, some are done as small gravel sized and marble dust and so forth for different kinds of applications. And as you head around the island, again, you can still see how beautifully green it is. And there's a number of beautiful beaches and small towns, mostly beach towns. They're not necessarily historic, but they have lovely beaches with lots of little places to stay and restaurants. And if you get down to about if you think of the island as a clock, down around maybe 5 o'clock or so, the southeast corner, there's an interesting spot called Aliki, which is a little peninsula that has twin beaches, one on either side of the peninsula that you can see in this photograph. And the name refers to the salt pans, which are still visible if you hike around the little peninsula. It was settled very early in the 7th century BC, and you can still explore the archaeological ruins that are on the island. I just spilled my alcoholic Greek drink all over my desk, so forgive me for that digression, but I'll keep going. There's a number of interesting foundations that you can still see on the site, but you can also walk around and see where the ancient quarries were. It's a nice place to walk because there's a lot of shade. In August, it's a very hot time of year, obviously. In the Middle Ages, though, not even in the very ancient times, in the Middle Ages, this was a very busy port that shipped marble from the quarries all over the Eastern Mediterranean. You can see even a lot of the local marble was used in the construction of various buildings that are in this area. And it was used up until the 7th century AD for like 1500 years or so. So in addition to the ancient ruins, what we're looking at here is a Christian basilica long after ancient Greece and even after ancient Rome. This was a Christian church built much later on the site. And you can clearly see the remains of the quarries by the seaside and this incredibly white marble. I was very fortunate in the weather when I was there, so there was plenty of sun. And despite being August, it was hot, but it was not humid. So it was actually a pretty pleasant time to be there. And here, what you can see here in this shallow area, these are the original salt pans, which have kind of disappeared because the level of the Mediterranean Sea has changed over time. It's risen a little bit since that time period. So now they're mostly submerged. But you can see that they would originally have been shallow salt pans where they would they would evaporate the seawater and harvest the salt that was left over. Nowadays, this little town is a kind of low-key beach resort. There's a few fish restaurants and guest houses, but it's pretty quiet. It's a very nice place to stay. If you keep going around just a little bit around the corner down to about like 6 o'clock on the island, at the very southern part is this dramatic cliffside monastery that you can see perched up here on the top of this seaside cliff called the Holy Monastery of the Archangel Michael, which has a spectacular view down the coast. It's an early monastery founded in the year 1090. Much of the building that you see, of course, is much more recent than that, but the history of the monastery goes back almost 1,000 years. It's actually a convent for nuns. It's interesting to note that in the Greek language, They use the same word for a monastery with men and a monastery or a convent with women. They use the same word, whereas in English we have two separate words depending on the gender of the people who are there. But this is a convent now, still active with a few nuns still there. Most of what you see today, including this beautiful church, is from the 18th century. But the site is just spectacular. It has an important relic, supposedly a nail from the crucifixion, from the true cross. And as you know, if you've traveled around Europe or not, there are umpteen churches that have some relic from the true cross. I think if you put all of the little pieces of the true cross together, you'd end up with something that was 10 times as large as the actual cross probably was. But that's how the church works. Anyway, it's a beautiful spot to stop and admire the view and the beautiful church. One thing that I found kind of annoying about the island, I had a rental car, as I said. There is public transit, but it's kind of slow. So if you stay there, I think you'd probably want to rent a car to get around most conveniently. But the other thing that people do is you'll see a lot of these little four-wheelers, which are unfortunately kind of noisy. They're not electric. They're these diesel-powered things that I found actually quite irritating. But you can escape them because there are a lot of places. Most of the tourists on the island head straight for the beach. And the beaches are nice, but there's so much more to see on the island besides the beaches. So if you explore a little bit around the corners, you'll find you often might avoid all of the crowds. Again, working our way around the island, this is on the very south part of the island. It's a little area called Giola. Yola. And it's a natural pool. You can see it here. It's just adjacent to the sea. And you can see it's totally crowded in the summer and very popular for swimming and diving. It's a very hot walk down from the main road over a lot of rocks. But the view is very impressive. And you can, if you're into swimming, you can jump off the little cliff here and dive into this cool saltwater pool right next to the ocean. A little further around the corner is another one of the big towns. I think this was the second largest town on the island, a newish waterfront resort on the south coast called Limenaria. And it has a lovely harbor, some beautiful beaches right in town. And on a bluff overlooking it is this interesting building. It's closed, unfortunately. You can't go in it. It's kind of dilapidated and falling down. It's known as the Little Palace, and it was built in around 1903 for a German mining company that was on the island at the time. And it was kind of the headquarters building for that company. But long ago, the company left, and it's kind of fallen into disrepair, and now it's just a picturesque ruin. But it's pretty. It's interesting to stop and take a look at it. Every now and then during this presentation, I'm going to take you for food because that's one of the main reasons to go to Greece. And so back in the town where I was staying, this is some delicious Greek food. One of my favorite Greek salads. This is called beet salad, pansada salata. It's one of those things where there's a lot of different ways to prepare it, tons of different recipes. Some of them are full-size marinated beets like this. Some of them are ground up into a paste like hummus with different kinds of herbs and spices, maybe even with yogurt. They're often served with vinegar and walnuts. That's one of the popular ways of making it, but it's one of my favorite things to eat and very cool and delicious during the summer. I also explored some of the interior of the island, which not many people tend to do, but it's well worth it. Everybody goes to the beaches, but there's some beautiful spots up in the mountains, one of which is called Castro, which means castle in Greek. And it's a tiny little settlement way, way up in the mountains, about 1,500 feet up. There's hardly anybody there anymore. It did actually used to have a castle, although that's pretty much disappeared at this point. And as in many parts of Greece, ancient villages, historic villages, tended to be built in the mountains, very far from the ocean. because though in those days there were pirates. And so there were no beachfront resorts that would be exposed to the danger of piracy. They built their places way up in the mountains where they could be protected. And it wasn't until like the last 150 years or so when more and more villages and villagers moved down to the ocean because piracy was no longer really a danger, and the economy of Greece shifted gradually towards tourism. So now you'll see a lot more places on the ocean. So this village is very tiny. The latest census that I saw says it has one permanent inhabitant, but while I was there, there were actually quite a few people, although it was summer. And they even have a little taverna that you can eat at. A pretty little church on the hilltop, looks like this inside. And a wonderful view, pretty much in almost 360-degree view over the island, because it was way up on top in the middle. You can see way off into the distance to the mainland of Greece. There's even this small chapel, which you couldn't go in. This is what's called an ossuary, which is a place where bones of the deceased villagers are put. A common thing in Greece, even today, particularly in smaller villages, the ground is so difficult to dig into. It's very rocky soil. So often what happens is in small villages, if someone dies, they bury them in a tomb, a grave in the cemetery. But at some point, they exhume them because it's too hard to dig the graves. And after a while, you reuse them and you put other people in them. And the bones are removed and put into an ossuary, and that opens up the grave for yet more dead people. So this being a very rural village up in the mountains, this has been a tradition for a very long time. So if you were to go inside this little church, you would find nothing but piles of bones from centuries of previous villagers, which is a little creepy. Another village that was also very worth visiting is called Theologos. At one point, Theologos is a pretty good sized place, actually. Even now, it has about 1,500 people. It's a pretty good sized town. And for several hundred years, it was the capital of the island. This is the pretty church square. A few tourists bother to go up to see it, but not very many. So if you head up there, you're likely to have, even at the height of summer, it's going to feel pretty quiet. It has a lovely folklore museum if you're into that kind of thing, in a wonderful old house, some beautiful architecture like this. I had a nice chat with the woman who ran the folklore museum, which costs like €2. And it shows what a typical home would have been like in the old days, to show you the kinds of decorative arts that they might have had, costumes, home goods, furnishings, all kinds of things like that. You might notice that the style of this house is very Ottoman, and that's because, again, we are very far north, and even today, there is still significant influence from Turkey and from the Ottoman Empire in terms of language, food, architecture, style, and so forth. So the further north in Greece you go, the more you see the leftovers of the influence of many centuries of the Ottoman Empire when Greece was part of the Ottoman Empire. So they have a lot of nice, interesting exhibits, and again, a very typical Turkish style house that you will not find in southern Greece, only in the north. There's also a pretty little stream, a river that comes down out of the mountains. That's a very cool place to walk with some interesting trees, these wonderful old trees. And I noticed this sign. They have this taverna that apparently still advertises traditional Greek breaking of plates, which is, it was a thing for a while in Greece, mostly in the 20th century, but it really isn't anymore. It's kind of a touristy thing now. I did not bother to go to this restaurant. Another little place I stopped back on the south coast is another ancient site called Thymonia. Modern Thymonia is now just a tiny little beach town. There's not very much there, but just a kilometer or so, if you take a dirt road up into the mountains just above it, you can see the site of the ancient town, which doesn't really have much left to it. There's just the foundations of the tower, the protective tower, that looks down to where the modern little village is, where all they have is a few houses and a beach. But it's a good reminder of how all over Greece, even in places where you don't necessarily expect it, there were ancient settlements, some big, some small, and you're very likely to find some interesting kind of um, ruins that you can stop by, many of which are just open and free. They aren't necessarily anything dramatic, but it's fun to explore. On the east side of the island, this is another view of the incredibly lush scenery that just doesn't look like a typical Greek island. You would be forgiven for thinking this is somewhere else in the Mediterranean or in Europe, because of how forested it is. I loved this town. This is one called Panagia, which is on the east side at about like 3 o'clock on the island. And I liked it because it had this particularly distinct architectural style, where they had slate roofs. Every house, every building in the entire village had these interesting slate roofed stone slates on the roof, which made the whole town look very much the same. And it's arranged kind of amphitheatrically in this little valley high up over the sea. And there's some wonderful architecture to explore, some elegant mansions, back when there were merchants, probably connected with shipping, particularly things connected to the gold mining or the marble quarrying that would have been going on. And a lot of wonderful little narrow pedestrian streets. And if you're up for it, there's a hike that you can take maybe half an hour down the hill from the village. Is a place called Dragon's Cave, which isn't all that exciting, but it's a cave, so it's kind of fun to see. And it follows a very shady little path down the hillside. The only problem is once you get down to the bottom, you then have to climb all the way back up, which is a little more strenuous. Here we are back in the old port for another meal. This is on the left is homemade moussaka and a salad with a carafe of wine. And if you want, there's plenty of slow roasted lamb if you like eating roasted lamb, which I do. So there's plenty of good restaurants in the town. And I left Thasos again on the ferry. I had a car, so you can drive the car right onto the ferry. And leaving, you get a beautiful view back to the town and the mountains behind it, where we were followed by lots of seagulls because you can count on the passengers of the ferry to feed them. So it was kind of fun to watch them following us all the way back to the mainland. This one's going after a French fry. And I'll point out, it's almost impossible to see in this. I can see it because I know where it is. But in the mist, in the photo, is the island of Samothraki, which is about 45 miles away to the east. It's another very green island with an important ancient history. I have not been there yet. I hope to get there at some point. But you can't, I'm just showing you the outline of where it is. If the weather is clear, it's quite visible. And you probably are aware of one connection to the island, which is the Winged Victory of Samothraki, pronounced Samothrace usually in English, which is in the Louvre in Paris, is that sculpture with the wings, and it was found on the island there. So it's very famous for that particular artwork, ancient artwork. So now we're going to switch to the other island. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because I think I have decided, I was just there 2 months ago, 3 months ago, in this spring, way down in the south. And I have decided it is now one of my favorite islands of all the islands I've been to in Greece. It is my favorite, and I cannot wait to go back. Karpathos, you can see, is way down here. It's not very far from Rhodes, which is extremely popular it's a big island, and it's also very popular for its historic city and its historic ruins, beaches and resorts, and it's a big cruise destination. So a lot of cruise ships stop there. Karpathos is reachable by ferry from Athens, although it takes about 20 hours. So you may want to take, as I did, take an airplane, which takes about 1 hour. It has an airport. And again, to kind of put it on the map and give you a rough idea of how big we're talking about, it's a very long and skinny island. Again, plunking it over Boston Harbor, you can see it reaches kind of from the South Shore all the way up to Gloucester. But it's very narrow and extremely mountainous. And again, I had a rental car while I was there and explored most of the island. I was there for 5 days, and I could easily have spent more and will definitely go back. Doesn't get many tourists. And many of the tourists who go only spend a couple of days and spend most of their time on the beach. But I hope I'm going to show you a lot more that's beyond just the beaches, because there's an awful lot more to see there. I have to say, it is not for the faint of heart. If you are a timid driver, there's very little traffic on the island, but the roads are very narrow, very twisty, and very high up. And a couple of things that I noticed that were interesting. There's a lot of curves. I thought this says, be careful. There are continuous dangerous curves for the next 10 kilometers, which for some reason got translated into kirtness. That's a very bad translation typo. I don't know what it's supposed to mean. The other problem I found on the island is an enormous amount of fallen rock in the road. And besides the many goats that you're likely to see in the road, the fallen rock made for slow going, particularly if you drive at night, which is probably not a good idea if you don't know the local roads. So there's a lot of this. You have to be careful of that. Places where the road has collapsed, there's occasional landslips like this. Or even giant boulders falling down like this. Fortunately, none of these happened while I was driving, so that was nice. But I was kind of aware as I drove around the island how if there were an earthquake, who knows, anything could be falling down on top of my car. And I thought, oh, you're being silly, Jeff, don't worry about it. Except that only a few days after I returned from Karpathos, there was a 6.2 earthquake very close to the island's airport that fortunately didn't do any serious damage on the island. But it was a reminder that Greece is a very earthquake-prone area. They have earthquakes many times per year in different places. Eventually, since I was there for several days, I wondered, what do they do with all these rocks? And eventually I did see they have a municipal bulldozer and backhoe that goes around and slowly works its way through cleaning up some of the rocks that have fallen on the road. But given that the island is about 50 kilometers long, there's a lot of road to take care of. So it may be a few days before they get to that. Lots of goats. You can see some here. Which are very agile at climbing. Another thing you'll notice on the island is it's very windy. So you'll see a lot of these trees that have grown in response to the constant wind that comes over the mountains. And as in much of Greece, I was surprised. Karpathos was greener than I expected for an island that is so far south, although much of the greenery tended to be at the higher elevations up in the mountains. But I should point out, you'll see a lot of little buildings in here, and this is true of many parts of Greece, where little churches and chapels dot the landscape. And you can see how many there are just in this one tiny little valley. There's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 chapels that I can see just in this one little corner. Here's a close-up. Many of them are quite old, and they're often open and you can just wander in and explore them. Some are very nicely maintained by the locals. Others are in ruins. But I'll show you a couple of very particularly beautiful ones as we explore. And there's plenty of larger churches as well, like this one, which was in the village where I stayed, which was called Olympos. Rather than one of the many beach resorts that are popular on the island, I chose to stay in the most traditional village on the island, which is about an hour and a half from the airport. The airport's at the extreme southern tip of the island, one of the few flat places on the entire island. And so my village, it took, an hour and 15, hour and a half to drive all the way to the north end of the island, where a goat welcomes you to the tiny village of Olympos. The entire island has only about 7,000 residents, and Olympos, which is its best known village, has about 200, and it's dramatically situated on a kind of saddle, very high above the ocean, with views in both directions, to the east and the west. Again, built there for safety from piracy in the old days. Now it is a completely pedestrianized village, so you have to park in a lot outside. And then from there, you can just walk and climb up and down all the little pedestrian alleyways and stairs. The architecture is very different from other places that you will see. You'll see it's very different from that Ottoman-style architecture in Thasos up in the north. But even so, it's even very distinct from the architecture on mainland Greece, and even from the Kyklades, like if you go to Santorini. It's kind of similar to that, but not really. This was my place, this building with the red shutters. I had a lovely room there in a very traditional style house. Most of the Dodecanese islands have this style of bed where there's beautiful carved wood on the interior and fabrics that are used to divide the different rooms. This is kind of modernized because it's a guest house now, but you can see you have to actually climb upstairs to a couple of different levels of bed. And underneath there are storage areas, cabinets where the residents would store various kinds of goods. So the place I stayed had just a nice little bathroom. It had a kitchenette and a nice dining area, and then a gorgeous view from a balcony out over the village and the cliffs. That was by far the best part of this hotel, which was unparalleled views up and down the coast. And it reminded me a little bit, having been to Santorini a couple of times, which in recent years, you've probably heard, has been suffering from just incredible over-tourism. Olympos reminded me very much of what Santorini must have been like in the decades before the cruise ships and endless tourists started to arrive there. So I spent a lot of time on that balcony. The village is wonderful. This was the taverna in the little square, which was run by Nikos and Maria, who have been there for ages. I got to be friendly with them because I ate breakfast there every day. Their son, one of their sons, actually, interestingly, works in a very fancy Greek restaurant here in Boston. So I'm hoping to stop by at some point and eat there and have a nice chat with him. They also had a little Jack Russell named Dobby, who we quickly became fast friends, and it was fun to visit with him. So you can see here the situation of this village, where it's on this ridge and the cliffs just drop on either side. This is looking more towards the east. I'm sorry, the west. And this is the east side of the village where you come in from the road. From any direction, it's spectacular. And in particular, at night, I'll show you some sunset photos. The sunset from this town is just unbelievably beautiful. It's one of the most spectacular in the Mediterranean. And you can view off in the distance, there's a couple of little rocky islets. These are uninhabited. There's nothing there but rock. And this is the east side spilling down the mountain. You can see the church. The main square is at the highest point up here, the main church, which I'll show you in a sec. And the opposite side, again, you can see it's kind of similar to Santorini, these white houses sprinkled like snow across the top of the cliff. And behind, you can see the remains of what used to be windmills, most of which are now just ruined foundations. They don't actually work anymore. This was the view from my terrace late in the afternoon when the warm afternoon sun starts to turn everything a nice warm yellow, and gradually it turns pink and red in the sunset. You can climb all the way up to the top if your knees are up for it, to get up to the very top windmill and get a beautiful view back down towards the village. This is the west side. And actually, I think from there you can see, where was my, yes, actually right here is where I stayed. That's my balcony there. And it's a fun village to explore. Every corner just opens up into an amazing landscape. And since I was there in the spring, it was still a time of year where, and actually the Aegeans had a lot of rain this spring, so it was a very good season for wildflowers. This was early May, the very first week of May. So wildflowers everywhere. This is the main public square, or platea, which has a number of little tavernas and restaurants and cafes, as well as the main church with its bell tower. Almost all the churches in Greece are Greek Orthodox. Chances are that's what you're going to be seeing. And this is a view, if you go up to the church, this is a view looking down to downtown Olympos. This is pretty much it. A couple of little tavernas and the main square, and that's it. So if you want nightlife, this is not the place for you. If you want peace and quiet and spectacular views and friendly locals, it's paradise. This was early May, as I said, so not actually all the places were open. There were a few places that hadn't opened for the season yet, so it was even quieter than normal. But I enjoyed that. And you can reach the top of the church if you feel like climbing. You can get all the way up to the bell tower, where there's an amazing view. This is the interior of the church and the main elaborately carved doorway. And I just loved being a photographer. I loved just kind of wandering around and looking at details, balconies, window frames, doors, still lifes. And I was really struck by the Dodecanese style of architecture, which is surprisingly elaborate. Many of the homes have these elaborately carved and painted balconies and friezes and decorations over the doors. That's something that you won't find in other parts of Greece, and you definitely won't find in the Kykladas Islands, where things tend to be very stark white, simple architecture. This is pretty much unique to this corner of the Aegean. Here's some food. I would say probably the best known dish on the island, and particularly in this village in Olympos, is something called macaroons, which is, as you might guess from the name, it's a kind of pasta, but they're very simple. They're kind of like gnocchis, except they're not made out of potato. They have, the only ingredients are flour, water, and a tiny bit of salt. That's all it is. And they are made by the little yayades who curl them with their fingers and then boil them. So they're very filling. And then they are served with the local cheese and little bits of caramelized onion. It's very simple food, very, what's the word I want? All I can think of is the Greek word, which is mamadistiko, comfort food, I guess is the translation. Very simple, very delicious, and very filling. So if you've spent the day hiking and traveling around, it's a good thing to eat when you get home. And follow it up with some lukumades, which are normally eaten for breakfast or as a fun snack at a festival. They're kind of like little donut holes, fried dough, but they're often served with nuts, sesame, honey, sometimes with chocolate sauce. So they made a delicious dessert. Um, Almost any Greek village, historic Greek village, probably has a lot of churches, way more than you would expect, compared to villages in old towns like here in the United States. So Olympos had probably 15, 20 little chapels sprinkled around it. This is one of them. And most of them are open, so you can take a look inside. Very typical interior here, decorated with local embroidery. And another popular thing about the village of Olympos is that most of the local women, well, mainly the older ones, still dress in their traditional outfits, not just for celebrations, but every day. During the tourist season, obviously that helps because uh, when they dress that way, it's a good way of advertising the kinds of things they're selling to tourists, but they wear it all year long. So even when there's nobody there, this is just the way they dress. And they're very proud of their early traditions. And I should mention that Olympos was for up until relatively recently was extremely isolated. The road that I showed you that went all the way up to the north of the island wasn't completed until the early 1980s. So for a very long time, within our lifetimes, Olympos and the other villages in the north of the island were pretty much isolated from the rest of Karpathos. The only way to get there was to either travel by donkey along old paths or by taking a boat to the closest port town uh, and again taking probably a donkey up to the village. So it wasn't until the 80s that this kind of became a modern village. Here's my morning ritual where I sat with my coffee and pastries and hung out with Dobby before I went off to explore the island. Um, my breakfast with a view often was just a good Greek coffee with, which is usually served with water, and some deep fried dough pastries, crispy pastries, which I like small breakfast, so that was just enough to get me going. Maybe some fruit. Um, on the right is a very popular Greek dish called saganaki, which is a fried cheese. Again, there's a lot of different recipes, and it can be made with different cheeses, sometimes with feta. This one was made with the local cheese from the island and served with lemon, which gives it a little tang. That was very delicious. This is the inside of the taverna. And if you stay in a place like Olympos for more than a day or two, I was there for 5 days, you become like family because so few people stay that long and there's just not that many stores and not that many restaurants. So you get to know everybody. And it was kind of fun to go off and do my explorations. And then every night when I came back, I saw the same people and they wanted to talk to me about where did I go? What did I see? What did I do? So it was a wonderful place to stay. Here's some dinner, a Greek salad with some homemade pita bread and wine, more lukumades and roast lamb with Greek fried potatoes. The thing that you can see in the back, those are fava beans, which are pureed and often served with little bits of red onion and sometimes caper and a little vinegar. Absolutely delicious. And just some more scenes around the village. I love the peace and quiet of the town and the views, of course. There is supposed to be a little folklore museum, but it was always closed when I was there. In fact, to be honest, it looked like it had never actually been open. But I did run into one night. I was just wandering around after dinner taking photographs, and I ended up chatting with a couple of women. This is Sophia, who um, ended up taking me into her house. She insisted on having me come in for a drink and showed me her house, which was easily a rival to any folklore museum that they could have had in the village. Easily as impressive because it had all the typical decorations, which were plates. This is that typical kind of bed that I was describing in my own guest house, where you have to climb up the steps into this elaborately carved wooden bed with the storage underneath. Um, Depending on how the bed was constructed, usually the adults, the married couple, would sleep in one part, and then the children slept in another part of the house. And this one big room was often used for sleeping, eating, entertaining, and so forth. And highly decorated with historic photographs from the family and dishes and all kinds of embroidery that's typical of the village. Um, Less so in the summer, but when I was there in early May, the quiet life really still exists there. So even today, it has a kind of isolated feel to it. There are, of course, cats because it's Greece, and a few chapels. You can climb down the stairs to see a couple of these pretty chapels, which face west, which is nice for viewing the sunset. Depending on what you feel like doing, you can either climb down or you can climb up. This is the path that goes all the way up to those ruined windmills that I mentioned. It's good exercise for the knees. I definitely plan to go back to Karpathos, and there's no question that this is where I plan to stay because it was my favorite place on the entire island. All the little paved alleyways. Notice on this one, these steps have even just little carved decorations into the stone. Again, more of that elaborate decoration that's very typical of the island homes. Here's another meal. This was a different taverna. I tried to spread the wealth around the 3 or 4 different places that were open. This is roast goat, which is very common on the island, with often with fried potatoes or rice and roasted vegetables. And this was a local eggplant salad that was served cold, very refreshing, and some local stuffed grape leaves. And again, this is fava. I love fava beans, which are pureed again with onion, herbs, and mixed in some capers that give it a little bit of a kick. And for dessert, Greeks don't actually eat dessert all that often. In a fancy restaurant, you'll get dessert, but in most local restaurants, the most you're likely to get is maybe a little dish of ice cream, maybe some fruit, fresh fruit, or often just Greek yogurt. This is, you can see how thick this yogurt is, and completely soaked in honey and sesame seeds. It was a fantastic way to end the meal. But I want to show you some other parts of the island as well. This is leaving Olympos to explore the island. This is the landscape on the east side. I made the mistake of following this gravel road down to a beach with my tiny little rent-a-car. It was a Suzuki Celery or something like that. And unfortunately, the road got worse and worse and worse. So it was kind of alarming, but I managed to escape. But if you go down several kilometers of this road, you end up in this lovely valley that has a completely empty picture postcard beach with spectacular blue water. Karpathos is known for its many beaches, and many of them have churches perched up above them like this one does. Here's the interior. And the view over the ocean. We're looking east in this case. Um, I debated what to do once I got here because I wasn't sure if I should take the same road to get out, which was pretty bad, and also uphill. But there was another road that was slightly shorter, and I thought, okay, I'll take that one. And it turned out to be worse. But I eventually did get back up to the paved road. The other main town, kind of in the center of the island, this is one called Spoa, um, very high up in the mountain, only about 100 people now. But it has a very nice view in both directions and some lovely churches nearby. This was just a roadside church in the middle of nowhere, but I liked it because it almost looks modern. It has a very sculptural feel to it. Some examples of the kinds of beaches that you'll see on Karpathos. This is one called Apella, one of the most beautiful and popular beaches there. There are dramatic rocks. Most of the beaches on Karpathos are relatively small and surrounded by rocks, so they're nice and protected. Um, and this one in particular is worth visiting because just up above it is this church. It's not far above. It's just like a 5-minute walk up from the beach. It's a Byzantine chapel built into a cave. It's a chapel to Saint Luke. It doesn't look like very much until you get inside. The frescoes that you're seeing in here, and it's tiny. It's probably about as big as your bathroom. But the frescoes that you see inside this church are from the 13th century. They are close to 800 years old. And again, it's just by the side of the road. It's open, and you can walk in and admire them. And then after that, you can go down and have a drink by the sea in the taverna, have a swim. The biggest place in the island is the capital city, which is called Pigadia, a decent-sized port. It's very modern. It doesn't have a lot of the historic charm of some of the mountain villages. And almost half the population of the island lives in or around the town. So it's the major ferry port, but it's not bad. It's got a very nice harbor. You can see here, very relatively busy. If you want a little more nightlife and excitement in your vacation, this might be the place to stay because it has lots of shops and lots of restaurants, lots of hotels. It even has some history there. On the way into the town, this is a little ancient ruin with medieval Christian basilica built on top of it from the 5th and 6th centuries when this was an important religious center. It's just outside of town, just by the side of the road. And up on the bluffs above the town, there are some lovely other little Orthodox churches and also a cemetery, which makes a nice walk with a view out over the bay. And a little bit inland, if you drive maybe 15 minutes inland from the capital, you can see here's plenty of goats again. Greece has more goats than any other country in the EU. I don't know how it compares worldwide, but in the EU, Greece has almost 4 million goats, which is more than a third of the population of humans. So that's like one goat for every 3 people. And they often spend time in the road, which makes for fun driving. But the reason I was exploring this little valley is for something much more ancient. You can, if you are able to climb like a goat up the cliffs, there is a natural cave, you can see it here, which was at some point carved into a shrine to the god Poseidon. I spent half an hour looking for this on the wrong side of the road, it turned out. And I finally asked a guy who was sitting in his car, and I had a conversation with him explaining, I'm looking for the thing. And he's like, you're looking in totally the wrong place. He had been watching me try to climb up the cliffs to find this cave, and I was totally off base. So, of course, it turns out that if you're on the right side of the road, there's a little sign, and it's a 5-minute walk up a paved path that leads you directly to the cave. So I felt kind of stupid. But anyway, for a long time, it was used by shepherds. So it's hard to know exactly how it was originally used as an archaeological site, but it's eerily impressive anyway, and you can actually see ancient carvings in the wall. So it's kind of interesting to see something like this that's just, again, just by the side of the road, but it's probably 2,500 years old. There's a number of other beautiful villages to explore throughout the island. This one's called Menetes, which has a lovely view. Way down, you can actually see the capital and the main port off in the distance. And it's particularly known for being very colorful. It's a sleepy town, but just the beautiful colors of all the different houses. If you think Greece is always blue and white, um, it isn't in every place. So this one was pretty dramatic. It has an enormous church way up high, which unfortunately was closed when I was there. Not sure why. But it's a very one of the older churches on the island and one of the most largest and most elaborate. But again, it was a wonderful town to just explore, see some daily life up and down the tiny alleyways. And it's been quite lovingly maintained. And if you want, you can head up even a little higher. You can either walk or drive to the hill that's just above the town, where you can see down to the village, all the way back down to the port, and you can see the main church with its square. Unfortunately, for some reason, they've built this hideous three-story concrete monstrosity right next to the church. I don't know why. It kind of spoils the view. But you can see all the way back down to the capital. Pigadia, the capital, is really the only place on the island that has large-scale hotels. You can see a couple of them. Any other place on the island, you're going to have only really small guest houses, Airbnb type places that are right next to the beach or within a village. As you head up the west coast is a little wilder, and the scenery gets much more dramatic. And there are certain areas where it's completely inaccessible after a certain point. There are no roads along the coast. But before you get there, there's a couple of very nice beach towns. Off in the distance, we're looking south here, you can see the island of Thasos, which can be reached by ferry. It's even smaller. It's a kind of companion island with about 1,000 people. It would make a nice day trip, except that the ferry schedule doesn't really work out that way. You kind of have to stay overnight. So I didn't have time to do that, but maybe next time. But one place that is worth stopping along this coast is the town of Arcasa, which is, again, just a nice little beach town, but it's known for this deceptively small looking peninsula. It's much bigger than it looks, and was one of the original main ancient towns on the island back 2,500 years ago. And today it makes a nice hike. You can hike up to the top of it, where there's ruins of the ancient Acropolis. And at the bottom before you hike up, there are a couple of very interesting chapels which have been built over the years from different time periods. So ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Byzantine times, and so forth. So you can see the different layers of, there are Roman mosaics and Byzantine era stuff on top. They're right by the parking lot. You can just explore those. And then you could probably spend an hour hiking up to the top, take some water because it gets hot, to explore the foundations of the ancient city, where you get spectacular views in both directions, up and down the coast. The only thing that you're likely to see there, because there's not all that many visitors there, is probably a bunch of goats or a flock of sheep who were very sensibly sitting in the shade. They were very suspicious of me because not terribly many tourists bother to climb up to the top. But you're rewarded with this incredible view of the blue, clear blue Aegean on both sides. And you can see some of the guest houses off in the distance. It makes sense that this would be a place to put an acropolis because you can see how well protected it would be. It's protected from the sea with cliffs. There's only a very narrow access to the mainland, so it's a logical place to put a fortification. This is another quaint little mountain town called Othos. It is the highest town on the island, 1,500 feet up. Not much to see or do, but it's a pretty place to stroll around. And they had some very stylish neoclassical houses like this, and a couple of beautiful churches. This is, again, just the sort of typical architecture. If you're wandering around little Greek villages and you're sometimes wondering which is someone's yard and which is a public road, I have found that often they draw a distinction. If you see little alleyways that have this white painted design on them, those usually indicate that it's an actual road that you can walk on, as opposed to the entrance to somebody's house that's private. So it's a very Instagrammable little village, but hardly any visitors, but very prettily situated up in the mountains above the olive groves, with some views down to the sea and over the churches and back to the capital. I drove up to the almost the highest point on the island, on this kind of scary little narrow road, which fortunately had no traffic. We're looking southwest, so what you can see is that island of Thasos that I mentioned. And way off in the distance, it's hard to see, but you may be able to pick out another island. That's Crete. Karpathos is situated between the very eastern end of Crete and the western end of Rhodes. So if the weather is clear, you can, depending on where you are on the island, you can see both of those. Because it was spring, there were wildflowers everywhere, and some incredibly precipitous churches. I didn't have the energy. This was towards the end of the day, so I didn't have the energy to actually climb up to these churches. Maybe the next time. And looking down again, this is another town called Vulada. And back in the north, heading back up to where I was staying in Olympos. Olympos has its own port, which is called the Afani. And nowadays it's about a 15-20 minute drive from the village all the way down the mountain to the sea. And as I mentioned earlier, before the road was built, it was really the only access to the northern part of the island. You would have had to take a boat here and then travel to other parts of the island from there. But it's a stunning port with completely hemmed in by mountains, small and charming. The yacht that you can see there is called the Panorama, and it's a rather, it's not private, it's actually a cruise ship, small. I think it takes fewer than 50 passengers. But if you have a little extra cash and you want to sail the Aegean, they have some very nice itineraries that explore a lot of the smaller islands that the big cruise ships don't go to. I think a week, I looked into it just out of curiosity, and a week costs around 3,500, 4,000 per person for a 7-day cruise leaving from Athens. But the port village is beautiful. It has this lovely nautical themed fountain in the middle of the port, and a beautiful Orthodox church. That's the interior, and that's the exterior. And from here, you can take a lot of really nice day trips with boat trips, which I wish I had been able to do. It was a little early in the season, so unfortunately, the couple of things that I wanted to do, I talked to a couple of the boat captains, and unfortunately, there just weren't enough people interested at that time of year to do it. Later in May, the season starts to pick up, so hopefully next time I can do that. I did do a couple of hikes. Karpathos is known for having some really dramatic hiking. And one route that is relatively easy to do and very beautiful, is at the very northern tip of the island, north of the village that I was staying in. And it leaves from the small village of Avlona, which you can see off in the distance here, tiny little village. And you follow an old donkey route down the valley. It takes about an hour and a half. You can see the beautiful wildflowers and the company that you'll get along the way. I saw exactly 3 other people on this hike who seemed to be Dutch tourists, and I passed them and then never saw them again. So I think they gave up and went back. So for the rest of the hike, I was entirely on my own, except for the donkeys. And when you get up to the very tip of the island, you see this wonderful vista with another island called Saria, which is off in the distance here at the northern tip of the island. That's uninhabited, but you can visit it by boat. And when you get to the end, it's another of the early settlements of the island. So back in the old days, in ancient times, this was one of the main cities on the island called Vrukunda. And it's extremely old. It goes back to Minoan times, Mycenaean times. It saw its peak kind of during the 4th century BC. Now it's all ruins. You may see a few animals along the way, but it's mostly atmospheric ruins and foundations, along with some ancient carved tombs, one of which you can see here. There are some other ones. And you kind of have to do some clambering around to explore them. But when you get to the tip, you go all the way to the tip to where the bay is. It's just a spectacular scenery, particularly in the spring with wildflowers everywhere, and a view of Saria off in the distance. You can see the ancient walls. There is one little modern chapel hidden in among the rocks, and just the unbelievably clear blue waters of the bay, which you can swim in if you feel like it. It's a nice protected bay. The highlight, though, here is a cave church to St. John of Rukunda. And the largest and most important festival on the island takes place here towards the end of August, the last week of August. And villagers from Olympos, where I stayed, and Aflona, the little village where I started the hike, they all descend for 2 or 3 days in this particular area. People stay overnight, they camp out, they serve food, and it's a big religious ceremony. Some people hike all the way down the same hike I took. Many people come by boat. And people feast and sleep out in the open, but the church is the main attraction here. This is the location of an ancient temple, possibly to Aphrodite, possibly to Artemis. It's not clear which, but it's quite large and incredibly atmospheric. This is what it looks like inside. I was there completely by myself, so it was like being transported to another world, another time period. This font of holy water, which is in the middle of the chapel, I should have taken a video because it was actually being refilled by water that was dripping from the ceiling through the rocks up above. And really, the only people, well, like I said, I hardly saw any people, and when I was out there, it was just me and the donkeys. And a spectacular view up the coast. You can actually see where Olympos is located. It's hiding behind the mountains, but it's about here. Another donkey. And I found, fortunately, I had one of those apps that can identify plants. These were all over the place. It looks like something you'd see out of a tropical jungle in Asia. This is a dragon arum lily. And I got very excited when I saw the first one because it was an incredible flower. It's like 3 feet tall. Until I ended up seeing probably 50 or 60 of them. They were all over the place, but dramatic nonetheless. Wildflowers like poppies. Here's a couple of other beaches. This is the port village that I mentioned called the Afani. If you go just a little ways up the coast, maybe a 15-minute hike, or you can drive. There's this little beach called Paralia Vananda, which has a view of Rhodes off in the distance, the southernmost tip of Rhodes, and its own little pretty churches and rocks that you can swim around among with perfectly clear water, and a view back to the little to the port village. There's quite a bit of both olive production and also surprisingly wine production way up in the mountains. Not as much as on some other islands, given how mountainous and rocky it is, but there is some. Another village which I think was my second favorite on the island, and I would be willing to stay there the next time, is one called Mesochori, a pleasant, tidy, out-of-the-way little town, very underrated in my opinion, and way high up over the sea. You can see the main square is built on a cliff, and it has a bunch of pretty little churches and tavernas. And again, just an amazing view down to the coastline where there are hidden beaches, a couple of really nice churches, guest houses. This is pretty much all there is. You park up at the top, another village where it's entirely pedestrianized. It's not quite as remote as Olympos, so if you wanted to be a little bit closer to things, this might be a good place to stay. And just, I'll finish off with a few more pretty churches and beaches to see, with fantastic swimming in the Aegean. And I think, yeah, I'll finish here. This is the last day I was there, I decided I would take another hike. This is the old road from Olympos, before the paved road was built. If you wanted to get way down south to the next major village, which was called Spoa, with no paved roads, you would have either walked or taken a donkey along this little path that follows the tops of the cliffs. It's a spectacular cliff-top hike, but to be honest, it's not that difficult because there's not a whole lot of elevation change, a little bit, but not too much. And it's also a hike where you can go as far as you feel like and turn around. So you can see part of it without necessarily killing yourself all day. There's a beautiful view back to the village of Olympos. And particularly if you do it late in the day, so late in the afternoon, it's a little cooler and you start to see the sun go down. So the lighting is just beautiful. You can imagine what it would have been like here in the 1970s before the road was built. This was it. Olympos was completely isolated. And this was the road. There's some beautiful views down to more hidden little beaches that are only accessible by boat, completely isolated. And if, again, if you're there late in the day, the sunsets from this part of the island are just unbelievable, incredible. Greece is known for sunsets from various different islands, but this is one of the best I've seen. The sky turns pink. We get back to the village and all of the painted houses start to glow because it faces directly west. And it goes down behind the windmills. I would say if you want the experience of what it's like to be on Santorini, but you don't want to be there with thousands and thousands of other tourists, Karpathos is the island for you because even at the height of summer, it gets touristy, it gets busy, but it is so much more relaxed, so much less crowded that I think you can experience a lot of what makes a place like Santorini so magical without all of the crowds. But the dramatic scenery as the sun goes down over the village, much more traditional. It doesn't have all of the façaria that Santorini has. You can see off, again, that's my balcony there with the view out over the sunset. Sunset, at least at this time of year, it was setting around 8 o'clock at night, and you can watch it just disappear down below. the horizon. I love this photo. This was totally by accident. I was in the right place at the right time. This is not a volcano. It just happens to be, it's the mountain that looms up over the village. And there was this incredible cloud that looked like a volcanic eruption with the sun illuminating it from behind. I just love how that came out. So it seems like it's a mountain pretending to be a volcano. And the sun just turns blood red before it sets over the uninhabited islands in the distance. And then this is the village at night. So have dinner, go to sleep, watch the stars from your balcony, and that's my ideal vacation in Greece. So I'll end the program there, and I'm going to stop my share and let's take a look at the questions. I'll do let's see. I don't see nothing in the chat. Okay, so just in the Q&A. Someone asks about upcoming programs. The next one that I'm doing, I'm away. I'm actually in Greece for most of July. So the next program I have, I think, with any library is going to be, again, with Robert here in Tewksbury. And that will be a program I forget the exact date, but it's in mid to late August. He will send out publicity. And that's going to be on Krakow in Poland, the city of Krakow, where I was just a couple weeks ago. What is the Greek word for monastery? The Greek word for monastery, there's two actually. To monastiri or imoni, both of which basically mean the same thing. Someone asks about what's the time frame before a dead person can be exhumed to make place for another dead person? I actually have no idea, and it probably varies depending on the village, because cemeteries are different sizes, and I'm sure there are different traditions, whether it's a more modern village or a very traditional village. So I don't honestly know. The village that my grandfather came from, I remember my father telling me a story when he went there when he was very young. There was a big box next to the church in the village. This is back in the 1920s, so not recent. But they had an ossuary that, it wasn't a fancy ossuary, it was a big box of bones in the middle of the village next to the church. And he and his friends, he would have been 6, 7 years old, they played cowboys and Indians with the bones, which is just kind of a creepy story. So I don't know. I honestly don't know. It was before my time. The trees with the stream running through it. Oh yeah, that was back on Thasos. That was a beautiful village. If you go to Thasos, absolutely explore it, because it was a very traditional village. The stream, even in the middle of August, it had a good amount of water running through it, and the trees. It was a very cool place to get away from the sun. Ideas for other libraries who do armchair travel. A lot of them do. Unfortunately, there's not one central way of finding that. I do programs for a number of different libraries, and I usually post on Instagram, on my Instagram account, which is just Jeff Klapes on Instagram. I post programs that I'm doing, regardless of which library they're at. But unfortunately, there's no one central place to know which libraries are doing what. Let's see. Let's see. Was it hot in there today? I'm not sure where you mean by in there. In my house, it's lovely because it's air conditioned. In Greece, it's hotter than hell. And in Boston, it's hotter than hell. I'm not sure where you are. How do they receive their electrical power on these small islands? That's actually an interesting question, because Greece is really big into wind power and solar power, as you can imagine. Um, Solar power is big on many of the islands, sometimes on individual houses. Many homes have individual solar water heaters. So for hot water, they just have a thing on the roof. The water is heated by solar power, and you have readily available solar power. Electricity in municipal electricity in Greece is expensive, so that's why wind power is wind power is kind of controversial in Greece, as it is in many places, because it's highly efficient. But a lot of people, particularly in places with beautiful scenery, don't want big wind turbines. So it works, but it's controversial. But nonetheless, Greece is one of the most advanced countries in Europe in terms of the percentage of their electricity that comes from renewables. I don't think they're the highest, but they're pretty far up there, and it's mainly because of solar and wind power. Would I not recommend this place for someone who has a fear of heights? Um, it's funny. I used to have a fear of heights, and to some degree, I still do. But the more you do, the less it bothers you. And I drive roads now that when I was like in my 20s, there's no way I would have driven on Karpathos. And now it doesn't bother me at all. Um, but it kind of depends on how bad it is, how bad your fear of heights is. Um, some of the roads are pretty precipitous, and they don't always have guardrails. So if that's the kind of thing that bothers you, you might want to think twice. And definitely don't take a bus. It's actually better to rent your own car, because then you can drive as slowly as you want. And the good thing is there's almost no traffic. So it's highly unlikely you're going to run into lots of other people on these roads. Do the locals speak English? Yes. Greece is, I don't think it's actually that surprising given how important tourism is. Greece has one of the highest percentages in Europe of people who speak English, or at least some English. So if you're any place like a hotel or a restaurant, you have to be pretty far off the beaten track to find places where absolutely nobody speaks English. And certainly, even on an island like Karpathos, which is not one of the most visited islands, if you're in any beach town or restaurant or hotel, they're going to speak at least some level of English. Do people own and milk their own goats for cheese? Some do. It's more likely that there are industrial level cheese making places. But on Karpathos, in rural places, it's more likely that there will be a smaller number of goat herds who manage a large a goat herd up in the mountains somewhere, and they would either produce their own cheese and milk and meat, or they would sell it to places in the towns and villages that would process it for them. Do the old women still dress in black because of a death of a male relative? That's the tradition. Yes. You will often see that even today. Not definitely, that's a tradition that's going by the wayside as older generations die off, and younger people don't tend to follow the same traditions. But it definitely still is something that you will see around. What do they do for work? Tourism is these days very big. Tourism and agriculture. Karpathos and Thasos in particular. Thasos had the quarries, but Karpathos is basically tourism, and the agriculture that they have is fishing, some degree of olive, cheese making, and wine is also there. Let's see. Can you say that this is their rural looks like? I'm not sure what that means. Both islands do have a fishing industry, yes. What was the name of the small cruise line that goes to the many Greek islands? You know, I don't remember the cruise line, but the ship is called the Panorama. So if you Google Panorama sailing ship for Greece, you will probably find it. Um, what is available for medical care on these small islands? That's a problem. Um, Karpathos is big enough to have medical care and hospitals and so forth, but it's way at the southern end of the island. Smaller islands may have almost nothing. And if you're seriously ill, you will probably have to get helicoptered to the nearest large place. Fortunately, Karpathos is again, since it's situated between Crete and Rhodes, which are big developed islands. In an emergency, you would probably get airlifted there. A while ago, I saw a presentation about Chios and its mastic trees. Oh, good. I'm glad you came to that. With the wildfires now, yes, this week there is an extremely big and bad wildfire in Chios, which is an island very close to the Turkish coast in the Eastern Aegean. The wildfires there are very bad, but fortunately fortunately for the mastic industry, at least, the fires are in the central part of the island, and the mastic industry is quite far away in the south. So it's bad that there's a fire, but at least as far as the mastic industry, which is very important for Chios, for the moment, they're relatively safe. The fire is actually pretty close to the airport and the main port town. They're not in danger because it's up in the hills, but it's bad. It's the biggest fire in Greece so far this year. How important is it that you speak Greek? You don't need to speak Greek. Most of the places, like I said, plenty of Greek people, and certainly anyone who works in a restaurant, anyone who works in a hotel where tourists would stay, they speak English, or at least enough that it's not a problem. If you learn a few phrases of Greek, I speak Greek, so that makes it easier. But even if you learn a few basic phrases like hello, how are you, please, thank you, where's the bathroom, that kind of thing, the Greeks will fall all over themselves with appreciation because so many people don't bother to speak Greek. Another phrase that I think is worth learning in any language, no matter where you travel in the world, is learn how to say, I think your country, village, restaurant, town, whatever, is beautiful. That is something, that instantly endears you to any local if you can compliment them on the place that they are, because people are proud of the places that they live. And if you show that kind of appreciation, you will make instant friends. Blah, blah, blah. Would I live there? Would I live in Karpathos? Nah, I don't know. I'd certainly go back. I have a house in Greece, actually, but not on the islands. I have a house on the mainland in the south of the Peloponnese, and I would not live there year round, but I'm spending all of next month there, and I can't wait. Did I miss? The village, yes, the village is called Olympos, accent on the first syllable. And the etymology of the name actually is connected to Mount Olympus, which is way up in the north of Greece. Interestingly, the mountain is, in the Greek language, the mountain is masculine. It's Olympos, O Olympos, whereas the village is feminine, E Olympos. Don't ask me why. That's just the way language is. But the name of the village, there's a long story which I won't go into, but is connected to an ancient myth about the ancient villagers on Karpathos kidnapping the gods from Olympus and bringing them to, anyway, that's where the name comes from. Are the villagers hard to understand because of their dialects? You would think so. I didn't have a problem. but my Greek isn't really good enough to get a lot of the local dialects, but I didn't have a problem with that. Grease and cats. Oh, how is the marble used today? Um, Mostly in building and decoration. I mean, obviously they're not building temples out of it anymore, but marble is a very popular thing for kitchen counters and floors, and so it's used in a lot of things today in construction. I commented about grease and cats. What's the reason? Um, Greece has lots of cats. I think actually a lot of Mediterranean countries do. There are stray cats all over Greece. I don't know why in particular Greece is known for it, but yeah, they're everywhere and they spread. Um, and they've kind of become a thing now. Um, da, da, da. Were you able to attend any divine liturgies? I have been to the church in my village for Easter. I'm not religious myself, and I'm not Greek Orthodox, definitely. So I don't tend to go to church when I'm in Greece, but I have 3 or 4 times in the village where my house is. They have a big Easter celebration and a beautiful church, so it's kind of fun to participate in that, even if I'm just because it's a village thing. What kind of rental car did I use? I always get the smallest and cheapest possible rental car because I love driving in Greece, but the roads are narrow and parking is hard. So the smaller the car that you're willing to drive, the better. I should point out that if you travel in Greece, actually in many parts of Europe, automatic transmissions are not as common there. Most people drive manual transmissions. So if you don't know how to drive stick, make sure you, when you're booking your rental car, make sure that you look for an automatic transmission and book it ahead of time. And they'll probably cost more just because there are fewer of them. The average vacation cost per day, it really depends. You can go luxury or you can go cheap. I usually go cheap. Most of the hotels that I stay or guest houses that I stay in are rarely more than $100 per night, and that's with a bathroom. Meals in Greece are not too, I think I would expect, like if I go to a taverna, I'll treat myself and have a nice big full meal with wine, maybe with dessert, with appetizers, and probably 25 to 30 euros is what I would expect to pay. You can eat much cheaper than that if you want to, or much more expensive if you want to. Where is my background picture? Oh, my background picture in Zoom. That is actually it's not my village in Greece, but it's the next village up the coast. It's about 15 minutes up the coast, which has a nice beach with a church on it. It's in the very southern part of the Peloponnese, which is a lovely place to go. And I have a program on that if you ever want Robert to have me do that for you. I think I got all of the questions that I either didn't answer or that were repeat questions. If I missed your question, I'm sorry, but I will put, whoops. And Robert usually sends this out in his follow-up email, but I will also put it in the chat. I am happy to take questions after the program. Shoot me an email and I'll do my best to answer it. Also, like I said, feel free to follow me on Instagram, which is, I'm just at Jeff Klapes on Instagram, and I post mostly architectural and travel photography. So, but that's also where if I have any upcoming programs, regardless of the library, I post PR there. So I think that's it. Thank you for joining me. And when did we decide? I think
I did put that in the chat, Jeff.
Put it in the chat. It's towards the end of August.
It's Tuesday, August 19th at 2:00.
Okay.
So we're going to make folks wait about 2 months. But we hope you enjoy your month in Greece, Jeff. And I hope it's not as warm as it is today, although I fear it will be for you.
It will be, but that's okay. Look, if you're going to be hot, you might as well be here.
There you go. There you go. So, folks, let's give Jeff a big virtual round of applause. As Jeff said, I'll send an email later today with the recording, information about some other upcoming armchair travel programs. And also I'll include Jeff's email address and a link to his Instagram. So thank you all so much. And for those watching live, don't forget to take the feedback survey that should pop up. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day. See you in a couple months, Jeff.
See you next time.
Yeah, bye-bye.